Alrighty, welcome out there, all you SuperCoach lovers, to SuperCoach Sanctum episode 3. I'm joined here with a new guest. We'll just throw it to you first. Welcome back, Mike.
Thank you. Good to be back after. You can't call me new. I was here most of last year, so returning guest, if you will.
Returning guest. And we've also got Scott joining us. How are you, Scott?
All good, mate. Good to go.
Excellent. And George back for another go.
Back again, keen to talk about the open or the community round that was.
That kicks things off. We're going to give you a bit of a snapshot of what we thought of the games over the weekend. We've picked out a few players that we think are worth highlighting. There's lots to talk about. Just worth noting before we start talking about these games, they were 26-player squads, which is a little bit different to obviously the usual 18 with four on the bench with that sub. And there were unlimited rotations. So some of your players that usually you'd pick and would be locked, maybe they didn't get as much game time because you know what you're going to get from your Brownlow medalists and your BNFs. Like, you don't really need to put them through the ringer too much. So let's jump into it. So the first game that we had a look at was Richmond versus Collingwood. Mike, how'd you see things play out?
Yeah, I think this, like many of the games in this round, all went to the form of 2023, pretty much. So Collingwood did Richmond over pretty easily. A few players that sort of stood out. You spoke about in one of the last episodes about the lack of premium forwards. So watching closely, Shai Bolton scored 88. And I think it's probably a lock for me. He did kick 3 behinds. So I think he's one well worth putting in. There was a watch on Nick Dacos. I think everybody's going to have him. I think, Scott, you didn't have him for a lot of last year, did you? Was that the Bond? Anyway, he's a lock. I think you'd be foolish. If you want to win it, you need to have Nick Dacos in your side. So he only had 20 odd possessions and still scored over 100. So he's definitely one I'd like to throw in the mix for a mid-priced forward. Scored 126, was the highest scoring Magpie. 389k. That's Patrick Lipinski. I think he was injured half of last year. Came in the back end. Scored relatively well, but well below his average in 2022, which was 85. So I reckon he's one to really have a go on. But perhaps watch how he goes. He's one of those players who'll be playing in round 0 on the weekend. So definitely a watch there for me. There was plenty who had eyes on Jack's younger brother, Finlay McRae. A lot of hype saying get him in your SuperCoach side. He ended up with a whopping 29 points. And Dan, you're talking about, the guns not getting a lot of time on the ground. I think he only played about 20 odd minutes or 30 odd minutes of the game. So definitely didn't impress early. And I'd be very surprised given that lineup if he does see a lot of games throughout the year. A few others worth noting. Jaden Short off the back line, 120 points. He's going to take your kick-ins again. For those of you who are Liam Baker fans, he only scored 62. He's a back forward, 445k. Speaking from experience, I think avoid Liam Baker, especially if Jaden Short's in your side. If Jaden Short's in your side, he doesn't score well when they're both in. Put him back on the half-back flank if Jaden Short's out, and all of a sudden he doubles his total. So that's one to consider if you are a Liam Baker fan. I'd probably avoid him just on those grounds based on last year. A few others. Thomas Dow, 96 points. A mid with 255k. He played the last 4 or 5 games to the Tigers, I think, last year. Average 57. But with Jack Graham out injured, perhaps this is one he might get some game time in the first half of the year. And really could make you 100 plus K. So one of those ones you'd be looking for. Again, round 0, he'll hopefully get a game and we can look a bit closer. So that's my wrap for for the Tigers and the Pies.
Excellent. Were there any sort of other things that we sort of saw there, George, Scott, that you sort of would want to point out about that game, or pretty thorough?
Yeah, just pretty good. Richmond and Collingwood aren't the most SuperCoach relevant teams. Josh Gibcus looked all right. I think he had about 60 points, 150k defender. He should play most weeks. Or should play every week, especially with Noah Bolton moving forward. So he's somebody you can probably lock on your bench, maybe even your D6 if you can keep up those 60s. But he is really the only other one that I'd actually be sort of noting from that game, Scott, unless you have anyone else to mention.
I was going to mention Gibcus as well. I reckon, yeah, just put him in because he'll play every week for sure.
Yeah. I know you talked about Dusty in your first episode, boys, and he only scored 62, 18 possessions. Yeah, I think he's past his best. I know, Dan, you're thinking he's been best for the last 3 years, but Dusty's past his best. He's an avoid for me.
I think that's very, very fair. I would back it up with saying that he's the type of guy that just doesn't look like he plays preseason. Like, you know what I mean? He just doesn't like. I'm just trying to talk other people into him so that they pick him up. He's not in my team. He's not in my team, and I think I've only had Dusty in my team like twice in the last 10 years, which might show my bias towards the guy. But anyway, look, the second game we had a bit of a look at were my Blues against the D's, and let's just say it was pretty painful watching. There weren't very many Carlton players to stamp their sort of authority on that game. Worth noting that Zach Williams played in the early game, played for the VFL, played I think the majority of that game and got through unscathed. He'll be a watch and wait for this week. If he plays this week, look, and scores well, put him in for the following week. I think it's
I'm pretty sure it's been confirmed he's playing, Dan. So Zach Williams is one definitely to watch this week.
Yeah. Obviously, we haven't really seen him go around for a little while, so worth noting there. So really, the only players to watch are mainly Melbourne players. I think Lockie and Gawn as that ruck to 185. As we said last week, this guy hasn't been under 600k for about 6 years. So you're getting him at a bargain basement, just lock it in. Caleb Windsor looked really good. I think he was named as starting in the midfield for this game, and it looked like he got a fair bit of ball. In saying that, Dee's confirmed today that Clayton Oliver's going to be back for round one. It did look like they were trying to get Christian Salem and a couple of other players around the ball as well. Billings up around the ball because they are reasonable users. But I think this guy will probably get a run in round zero. So check him out.
I think they said today that he's playing. So I'm pretty sure I read today that he's playing. Right. So
yeah, check him out. Like we were saying, this is a free hit with all these guys. Like, it's very rare that you get to see them in a full actual AFL game, not a practice match, to sort of judge them. I think, look, the outs put a line through him. Sam Walsh, he's obviously got that back injury. He's not going to be back until round 3. I always worry with back injuries. I always worry with obviously a premium price player. You've got a bit of time in your hands now. So if he comes back round 3, he starts setting the world alight. You've got at least 2 weeks to look at him. But is he worth the risk with that history now in the last year and a half? Who knows? Final mentions. Jack Billings looked really good. 91, 244k. I think he's certainly worth looking at. Christian Petrarca, 79, well below his usual output. Again, preseason game, is it really what he's sort of about? Christian Salem, 102. His ball usage to the mid was good. He's only 420,000. This is a guy that was up there in terms of defenders probably like 3 or so years ago. I reckon he was in the top 6 defenders, so he's worth looking at. And lastly, George Hewitt, who's a bit of a forgotten mid from 2023. Back to healthy, no Walsh. He really does do a lot of work in that midfield for Carlton. Were there any others that caught your eyes?
I reckon you hit it right ahead for me.
There's just one for me from Melbourne who's already been confirmed to play for his debut, Blake Howes. I think he's 123k defender. Didn't look very impressive. I think it was like 44 points in about 70% game time, but he's getting a debut, so he's someone that we can at least watch in round 1. If he's good, put him in. If he's not, we don't need to worry about him. That's the best part about the free hit.
Definitely, definitely. Sydney versus Brisbane, Scott. Who was setting the world alight there?
Yes, well, I think if I was looking through the games, and I reckon there's almost 4 Swans you could say are locks. So, which is, I guess, lock with an asterisk because they obviously have the bye early on, given they're playing round 0. I think nearly everyone would have Errol Goulden if they didn't have a bye early on. So it's just a matter of how many mids you're actually willing to take the punt on, or primos, sorry, with a bye early on. For me, I mentioned in the first and second episodes, he's my favourite player. So I'm locking him in anyway. He dominated 133 points. I don't care that he's 622,000. Lock him in. James Jordan, Parker's down. Adams is down now. He scored 115, 275k mid/forward. I think he'll become almost the most popular player in the whole thing by the time we start, particularly when he scores well this Thursday night. Brody Grundy only scored 65, but who cares? Like when he's solo rucks, I reckon this week he'll dominate. So not worried about that one. And Matt Roberts, who I think he went down early last year with injuries, 156k mid. He scored 100 as well. So again, with those couple of outs, I reckon he's a chance to get some valuable mid time. So almost locking in 4 Swans, which is pretty keen. Might have to just ditch one just so I haven't got so many. There wasn't any really too many lines that overly stood out for me. Lockie Neal, if you're just sort of umming and ahhing between your 3 and 4 second, whatever mids, he might be the one you pick. He scored 124, won the Brownlows fit, so why not? And those on Kitty Coleman watch scored 89. Only was 74% of time on ground, and he's at less than 400. Are we still convinced? Maybe. It's going to be just sort of whether you think he's going to be a top 6 defender or not. And then finally, a bloke, Kai Lohman, scored 99, so he might be a different choice for your forward line, 150k. But again, these blokes are all going to be playing in a few days' time, so just watch them. Going to be interesting because when a couple of them dominate, everyone will have them. So unless you want to be risky, wait for one to not dominate and then have a punt or vice versa. But aside from that, we're going to have a lot of similar players, I reckon. Any others, boys, from the Swans and the Lions?
Yeah, look, just worth noting, we're talking about time on ground. Lockie Neal's was, what was it, 124? And I think his time on ground was like 60%. Like he did all of that in like the first sort of 3 quarters. So absolute monster effort from him.
I think he's shown in the past that if he is fit and healthy, he scores big. The only thing is he's quite susceptible to a tag, but I think one of those ones where if your opponent has him and you don't, you could find yourself on the end of an L 1 week where he gets going.
The only thing that I've just noted about Lockie Neal is that this was actually his first game back all preseason. Didn't play in any of the intra-clubs or their other practice matches due to groin surgery in the off-season. So there's actually a quote going around today saying that he might be on managed minutes for the start of the season, hence why he played such little time. With the bye, I'd probably consider passing. But yeah, just quickly on Matt Robertson, Kai Lohman off half back, but they do have Jake Lloyd for Sydney, and it is Connor McKenna for Brisbane, who will likely return in round 0. So just watch their roles pretty carefully, see if they're still best 23.
Exactly right. Plenty of watching going on this weekend. It's so unique. It's a bit ludicrous, really. Anyway, that's enough from me, Georgie. You're Port Free, I reckon you can have a look at, mate.
Yeah, so pretty relevant game for SuperCoach. The first game we're looking at that doesn't have any round 0 teams in it. So this is the last look we'll get at these players. Also, both these teams have what I believe is to be the best spikes. They only share it with each other in the middle of the season. Big standout to me was Ollie Wines, 130 SuperCoach, was at 76% of CBAs. All that talk of him being as a premium mid or being back in those centre bounces seems to be true. A little bit of a watch, though, is that because Zach Butters went down really early with an ankle injury. It's something to sort of be careful of when you look at a lot of these players, like Jason Horne-Francis had 105 points, but 64% of CBAs. Does that drop assuming Zach Butters is ready for round 1? You just need to be careful with those. Connor Rosie had a good game, only 52% of CBAs, but had 113 points, 553 metres gained. So he was really pushing that ball forward, even if he wasn't exactly at the bounce. Dan Houston, one of my favourite defensive selections, 109 Supercoach, doesn't need kick-ins to score, plays fantastically at Adelaide Oval, where they play 7 of their first 10 games, I think 4 of their first 5 as well. So I'm really hot on that pick. For Freo, Hayden Young, little bit concerning last week. This week he showed why we've had him in our teams all preseason. 80% of CBAs, 115 points, 7 tackles, just looked the goods. Nat 5, someone we spoke about a little while ago. Scott, you weren't the biggest fan of him. 76% of CBAs, 72 points, 26 touches. He's so back. He is so back. And I don't want to hear anyone argue that point.
Watch him go out in the first round.
If he goes out in the first round, then God help me. we'll cope with that as we need to. A couple of guys we could probably scratch off our list. Andy Brayshaw, only 52% of CBAs, looks to sort of be stuck on a bit too much of a wing. Wasn't that efficient today, only put up 84 points. So there are better options at the price. Sean Darcy as well, only played 40% time on ground because of those managed minutes as well. Put up 52. Luke Jackson didn't play, but he'll be back round 1. So no need for Sean Darcy. A couple of rookies. Jackson Mead put up 112 points as a 200k mid forward. Had 28% of CBAs, but I'm hearing talk from a couple of Port fans I know that it's just the Sam Powell pepper roll. So even though he might get those first couple of games, huge drop watch, huge sub watch as well if he doesn't go as good as he did. Jeremy Sharp was all right, 51 points, 77% time on ground. Did he do enough to lock down a wing spot? Probably not. Does he still have it for round 1? Probably yes. Otherwise, Caleb Strong, good. Didn't do anything to take him out of your team if you already had him. Luke Ryan really stepped up. Rumours of him being injured were just quashed with 116 points. Kicking King, 7 of 13. I touched on Jason Horne-Francis. I think that's most of the wrap-up for that game, unless anyone else has anything to add.
Andy
No, very
Brayshaw.
comprehensive.
Brayshaw, no. 5, no.
5.
Yes, 5. 5. We want the 5.
I'm
totally with sorry, I was just gonna say I'm totally with Mike there. Like I reckon he's just gonna do something horrible. I hope not. But
the best part about Fife is, at least if he's 280k, say he gets an injury, God forbid, we don't want that to happen. He's one of my favorite players to watch. But if you choose to go without a Billings, Harms, any of the other cheaper rookies, you can go head down to them without much of a fault. That's why I'm more willing to start Fife instead of him going crazy in round 1. Say he drops 100 and all of a sudden Billings is like, damn, he only put up a 70, then a 60, and you're like, I should need to upgrade. You don't want to have to be finding that money. You'd much rather be able to bank some coin by dropping 5. Anyway, Mike, I'll throw it back to you, Mike, for the last round 0 game, because I think Scott might go on a real tangent if I keep talking about 5 any longer.
Yeah, right. Okay, I had the GWS and the Suns as the second game up, and some interesting watches in this game. Some familiar faces. Start off with the Greens. So Toby and Tom. I think Toby Primo in the forward line, I think, should be a lock. I think he proved last year, leadership position, scores consistently, suspended less than in previous seasons, but 124 points on the weekend. Kicked 3 goals, 3. He's going to get a lot of the ball. He's a fine player, and with other Primos scarce in the forward line, he should be your F1 or 2, I would think. Tom, interesting. 118. He scores a lot. Gives away a lot of free kicks. Yeah, I'm never convinced. I think there's plenty of others primo mids that I would put above Tom Green. Interesting to look at Briggsy. He was a revelation for the second half of last year when he came in as a ruck. Scored another 112 points. I think the big talking point is Sexton. Mind you, they're all good talking points. Dimmers seem to be talking up every single person that plays for the Suns at the moment. I guess so. He should, but I think you'd be a fool if you didn't have Sexton in your side. He was a top Suns scorer, 31 disposals, most of the time on the ground, 125 SuperCoach points, and what is he's coming in at 133k as a forward. I think we've seen enough, but let's have a look at him in round 0. Couple of others. Harry Himmelberg. He's one of those ones where if he plays forward, you don't have him. If he plays back, I think you should have him. Great intercept player. Uses the ball really well, switches the ball a lot. Good by foot. I think there's talk that he'll play more back than forward this year, if you can read anything to what is said. But he's definitely one to consider in your back line. Flanders was the big other watch, wasn't he? I think we're all with bated breath to see how he went. He didn't score all that well. 65 points, struggled to get his hands on the ball, but again, Dimmer has said that he'll be playing that midfield role. So we wait and see about Flanders. There was one others that, got to talk about Took. Injured a lot last year. I reckon he'll be back. 1 goal, 33 disposals, 116 points. I reckon he's in for mine. He's a bit underpriced to where he was in 2022. I think he's sort of mid 500s. So I think he's worth definitely considering in your midfield. I don't think I've any others, boys.
Just a couple of rookies on GWS I'll just touch on if you don't mind. Aaron Cadman, 43 points, but kicked a goal. If you kind of need someone for your F8 spot, he could be a guy. Jacob Weir played a really good unofficial game in the last quarter, went crazy. A little quieter today, only 12 touches. And the really exciting one for GWS, I think his name's Harvey Thomas. He's like 117k mid-forward, 72 points, 14 touches. Just looked pretty lively, someone to consider. Also for Gold Coast, Connor Buderick, 300k. Talked about him as an option. Damien Hardwick, again, loves his quotes. Said he was getting that Jaden Short role. Didn't really survive power coming back, only dropped to 60. Dexton survived power coming back, which is fantastic. But yeah, I think Buderick, you can scratch him off your list if you did have him in mind. I could say I did, but not for me anymore.
Just talking about Flanders. Obviously they're talking through the call that he was swapping out of mid-time with Raul, and if he's swapping with Raul, you sort of go, well, is he really going to get that many CBAs? Like Raul's not going to be off the ground that much. In saying that, like when Flanders was in mid, he did some awesome stuff with the ball. So that one is going to be an interesting one. I reckon certainly check him out this week. But if he is still swapping with Raul, I can't see that he's going to make his way into my team.
I think with Cadman, I know he's a number 1 draft pick, but I'm always reluctant with very tall forwards, and he's got some time to develop. I don't think he's getting to the heights of making you 150, 200k, as much as I would like to see him succeed, and the Giants to succeed, but I don't think he's going to reach the heights that we need in the forward line. I think there's other options.
He just absolutely screams of if he somehow kicks 5 goals, puts up 110 points in round 0. Just
everyone will jump on it.
Get that cheap, get that first 2 weeks of cash shared. If he does crap, then just don't think about him. But just want to at least. Again, I think that was the last of the games that had round 0 implications, so we could finally stop saying just watch them in round 0. We actually we're finally looking at the games that are just this is your last look. Hope you've done the research on them. Scott, I'll let you talk about Geelong Essendon. I know you're a Cats man. I think there's one man in particular you're very excited to talk about.
Well, yes, don't mention Max Holmes, but no, one I think I will mention him. One thing, watching the Cats, Jai Clark looked right at home in the midfield. There was one passage play where he had about 4 attempts to tackle and just kept chasing and eventually nailed someone. So I think there's no doubt that Geelong will pick him. So 123k mid. If they pick him, just pick him in your side. I reckon I'm picking him for sure. He was about the only sort of lock I could definitely say from both the Cats and Essendon. Tom Stewart, just whatever. He just cruised along for the game. He wasn't really trying as much. There's been a lot of people keen on Nick Martin. So he had 109 points, so he didn't disappoint. 492k mid. If you think he's going to get to 600,000 plus and be one of your top 8, then sure. Darcy Parish, he got 123, and he's sort of the forgotten dominant midfielder, I guess. If you're just trying to pick between the Neils and Petrarcas and Parishes, who knows, just horses for courses. A couple to avoid. Jordan Ridley got 76, but he got injured, so they say it's not too bad, but I would just avoid for now, given the injury. I don't even know how to say it. My man, Sean Manna, I don't even know how to say his surname. Apologies if he's watching. But he scored 44. I think the Cats are keen for him to play some games, but I don't think he's got a big scores in him. So he's 117k forward mid. I think there's probably a couple ahead of him, Stengel and whatnot. Rowan didn't play, so I think he'll get a game at some point, but just watch him. And then finally, my man who we talked about, I named my team after last year, Max Holmes. Do we dare? Do we dare? Do I dare do it again?
Get him in.
He was the dominant Geelong player pretty much. Chucked him. It was in the middle for a bit, but then off halfback, his run was unreal. He was Geelong's best player. He scored 108. He's 446k. So if you're going to get him in, you're almost back in that he averages 110. So, oh jeez, it'll be tempting for Geelong supporters. He won't be tempting for anyone else.
It's Max Holmes watch every round.
I will
think
put Max Holmes. We should all have to pick one player for each other's team, and then you guys can make me have Max Holmes. That's about the only way.
Look, he was another one that was looking like if he does play that back role, like the new thing about SuperCoach is that you might go, well, he has to average 108, but does he? Like if he plays in the back line and gets a dual position status, he might be your D6, and he might be a very good D6. So it's like, I don't know. He looked really good. He looked really good. It's that preseason thing. I'm talking you into it, Scott. Get him in. Get in Max Holmes.
He's in.
Max Holmes.
Lock him in.
Lock him in. Lock him in.
If I can play devil's advocate, even as a Cats fan, this goes generally for like all the preseason games. A lot of halfbacks in those wingmen tend to do really well because it's a very outside game. I think at the Saints game, which we'll get to later, I only had like 71. I don't know what, I can't remember what the exact stat was, but it was such a outside game where the halfbacks were just going crazy. Like Jack Steele could have had a much better game. We'll elaborate on that later, but it's games like these where Nick Martin, Max Holmes can look really good as halfbacks just because of how loose teams tend to play them. But yeah, Nick Martin, I'm very keen on as someone who could average 105 and be a D6 lock, but a little worried that it's just a pick you don't want to make a mistake on it. 400 or 490 odd K in the mids. Where do you go from there if he's not a successful pick? It's just really awkward.
You go straight to Nat Fife, mate.
I've already got him. I can't do that.
Well, Fife v Holmes. Let's see who scores more. That's the weekly watch. All right, George, I might throw to you. I think you're looking at the next game, the Hawks and the Bulldogs. We've got a couple to go.
Yeah, Hawks and the Bulldogs, it was the Libra and Bont show as it was for a lot of 2023. 135 and 136 SuperCoach for Libra, then for Bont. Both here absolute upper echelon primos, but both look like they're going to be putting those points on the board as they were last year. Libra, 87% of CBAs in a preseason game is just kind of crazy. Bont was a little less, only at 67%. Between the two, they had 15 tackles. It's a little hard to justify Bont at his price, but Libra at his, I think he's just an absolute lock. I touched on him in one of the articles that's currently live on the Inner Sanctum. There also, I think there's 3 of them talking about all midfielders who are pod, so please go check them out. There's some good stuff in there. Tim English, another super expensive player, 134 SuperCoach. He's probably going to be the R1 again. Can you pay up for him, given we've got Gordon Grundy? That's a big question, but he just is an absolute SuperCoach god these days. Riley Sanders is the other one who's an absolute lock for me. 86 SuperCoach, only at 17% CBAs, but had 30 disposals. There's an argument that he's already the Bulldogs' third best mid behind Bont and Libba, and I genuinely think that's true. I'm not worried about Harms. I'm not worried about anyone else who could affect his status as a good pick. Sanders, he's just someone you got to lock in at 185k and not think. James Sicily, on the other hand, is an avoid. Too expensive. Looks like he's going to play more accountable as we expected with all the injuries. Only put up 52, only had 4 marks. Took a few kick-ins. I think he took 3, but just better options that are cheaper. You can pass on him. a lot of good cheaper options came out of this game and sort of put their hand up as selections. I'm going to start with a couple of Bulldogs ones, Lockie McNeil and Buku Karmas. McNeil, as 159k forward, put up 98 Supercoach, only having 16 disposals. Very efficient game. Is he best 22 with a few players to come back in? Bailey Dale, sort of a notable one. He could be playing back, he could be playing forward, which could affect the next man. Buku Karmas played back. 59 Supercoach, but played 96% time on ground, had 8 marks, looked just really good. Nick Caulfield, one we've had in our benches for a while, only 51 Supercoach. 14 disposals, 13 kicks is a very nice ratio. Little bit concerned for his on-field status as someone who was sort of pitching as our D6, so just wanted to keep an eye on there. Otherwise, a couple of cheaper options, this time from the Hawks. Massimo D'Ambrosio, 77 Supercoach, 225k. Could have been a Zach Williams alternative, but Zach Williams looks like he's back. D'Ambrosio didn't take any kickouts and Weddle still to come back in. So for me, you can just probably give him a pass unless Williams sort of crashes and burns round 0 and maybe you want to get an option around the same price in. The other one is the pencil, Henry Huthwaite. 84 Supercoach, 50% of CBAs, 5 tackles, 184k. He's one of many players around that price point who is just looking really good. You might struggle to get them all in, but he's probably one of my favourite ones if he's actually getting those midfield roles. He looks really good. Played the last couple of games last year and looked talented as well. So one I'd be pretty happy to put in without much thought. Carl Amon is another one of those midfielders who could be getting defensive eligibility at 480k. He had 96 Supercoach, took 8 out of 17 kick-ins, and of his 28 disposals, 24 of them were kicks. So if we're talking about that kick-handball ratio, he is absolutely flying. So probably around that same tier as Nick Martin for me as someone who could go, although no Weddle, again, as I mentioned, makes it a little bit hard to pick. I think I have Martin just ahead of him. I also would rather pick Martin, who just has a bit more upside as a younger player. And the other one, guy on Twitter, works Dr. Supercoach, Pig Mentality, absolutely loves this man. Jai Newcomb, 125 Supercoach points, 77% CBAs, 37 disposals. He looked like an absolute freak. He's another one of the guys I touched on in one of the articles on the Inner Sanctum. Seems to be as fit as he's ever been. Only played 50 games. He could be ready to fly this year as a genuine top 8 mid if everything goes right for him. But I think that just about sums up everyone in that game, unless I've missed anyone, guys.
No, very comprehensive.
Perfect,
Newcomb's Newcomb's one that yes, he gets a lot of the ball. His ball use is not as great as others. So he's one of those Taranto types that just doesn't seem to use the ball as well. I'm up. I've got the traditional Sunday 2 p.m. slot game. The one down at Marvel was got 6 people watching it. And that was St Kilda versus North. Classic game. Just the best football going around these two teams. If my friends are watching that are both Saints and North supporters, look, you're probably the only ones that wanted to watch this match roll out. I did watch it. I watched a fair bit of it, and there were a few players that obviously we want to chat about. First off, Jack Steele. We were talking about this idea of of getting sort of that outside ball, and he did get a bit of it. 111 Supercoach. He looks fit after a rough 2023, and I think even his 2022 was interrupted. At 529k, this is a guy that has averaged over 110 in seasons past. Look, he could do it again. I can't really see any other strong St Kilda mid stand up and get the points. Obviously, Brad Crouch did okay last year, but I think Steele's the one. The other one for the Saints I want to talk about is Callum Wilkie. Scored 123. He is the user off the half-back line. Uses the ball so well. So this was 19 touches, and he was going at something like 80+% efficiency. That's why he was able to get 123. He's very damaging. Harry Sheasel, the human Sheasel, only 102. Got into the game late. He had something like 17 disposals leading into the last quarter. I reckon it was a massive last quarter that he had. But the person that was taking a lot of his kicks, a lot of the ball, was Zach Fisher, who we did speak about in our earlier sort of things. 378k. This guy scored 132 versus Sheasel's 102, and he costs about 200,000 less. Very interesting. 36 touches for Zach Fisher. Kobe McKercher, 55. Yeah, he he didn't really set the world alight. After the previous week, obviously, he kept getting an absolute heap of the ball on half back line. I think that was without Zach Fisher, so maybe just not going to get as much of the ball there. Wardlaw, slight injury concern, only 63, 365,000. This is the last time you're going to be able to see him. I just don't have confidence in him. I don't really have confidence in many of those mid-priced roos, to be honest. Toby Pink scored 70, looked okay after a bit of a start for 123,000. Again, if he's tipped to play, if he wants to be, on your bench for that D8 or D7 sort of spot at the moment, look, he outscored lots of those other guys that were in that same sort of price bracket. So an interesting one there. Riley Bonner, 127. St Kilda got this guy for a packet of chips, delisted at the end of last year by Port Adelaide. Obviously, has come over, and he is a 284,000 mid, but he will surely get dual position status in round 6 for the Saints. So again, he could be a very low priced but high scoring option for your backline. My last one that I want to sort of touch on in terms of relevant would be Michito Owens, scored 90. He looked amazing, but this is a guy that I think that sometimes you get, he scored well in this game. He's not a high possession player, so he's very much a high impact. Like, he'll get a few touches, look very, very good, but one that, although that 90 looks enticing for a 445, I would be, probably not putting him on my list. Was there anyone else? Yeah.
So I just want to say, with Machito as well, I was watching that game and watching it pretty closely. I saw Machito was on at 110 SuperCoach at some point, and then just didn't do anything in that sort of late game where it ended up getting pretty close and then just dropped back to a 90. So saw some scaling kicking hard for them. If I can mention one guy who I think is an absolute must-have from this game as well, Darcy Wilson, 130k forward and mid, DPP, 107 points, played that sort of high half-forward role, just looked absolutely fantastic. Scores a little inflated because I think he had 6 free kicks for and none against. That's not going to happen every week, but he just, man, so good to just have a nice, cheap forward mid DPP option that you don't need to think about. You can just put him in the team. Another guy who could be considered this Wanganeen Miller, 107 points.
Yeah.
No Sinclair has me worried. In saying that, the Saints midfield is not great. So could Sinclair step back into that midfield again? Probably, although Sinclair's such a Mr. Fix-It type of player where if you need him on a half-back, needing his ball use, you put him there. If you want him in the guts, you put him there. So I don't love the Wanganeen Miller pick, but I can see why people would be leaning towards that way. Ari Schoenmaker, 60 points, 16 touches, looked all right. Job security's gone a lot better, given that Jimmy Webster probably won't be playing until June due to his absolutely massive hit on Simpkin, who we hope is back on the track soon. And last person who I want to touch on, actually, there's a couple more I want to touch on because I'm just looking at the game right now. Davies Uniacke, 36 points. As someone who I've had my team all preseason, why are you making these decisions so hard for me so at this point in time? I've looked at it and I've gone no Cunnington, no Taron Thomas, should be an easy pick. He's going to get 80% of CBAs, and then he drops to 36, looked disinterested at best. And you wonder, wow, what are we doing there? On the brighter side, Charlie's up
before a game.
Oh, yeah.
He'll be laid out. He'll be laid out 3 times this season, and every single time you'll be going, what's he laid out for? Has he had a dodgy meal the night before? It could be anything with this guy. So
You
sorry,
hold on to a lot of grudges, don't you, Dad?
I don't forget.
A couple others. Charlie Lazaro, 21 touches, got a little midfield time, only scored 68 points, but looks pretty locked into that best 23 for North. So someone you can sort of have even as an F5 behind Reed in between Sexton. So if you want to go cheaper in that forward line, Biggie Newen, 87 points from only 15 touches as a 123k forward. If he gets that role, it seems like he's got it over Charlie Comben at the moment, at least. Could pick him. Last 2 players I'm going to touch on are the rucks. Tristan Cherry, I know. I have looked at North at this game and I've gone like, yeah, there's a couple of relevant players, and you keep looking, and you're like, holy shit, they've got far too many that are weirdly good for being such a bad team. Don't get it. Anyway, Tristan Jerry, 99 points, looked all right. I wouldn't pick him over Grundy, at least if you're going to go in that direction. The other person who I would consider is someone I've had in my preseason team a lot, Rowan Marshall, only put up 102, but had 19 touches. As I mentioned earlier, this game had a weirdly low amount of like ruck contests. And even still, Rowan Marshall was able to put up a 102 and 79% game time. Was off for a bit in the first quarter due to a couple of cuts on the forehead. So one I still really like if you weren't in love with Grundy's performance in the community series, and maybe after round 0, we'll see how he fares. But that's it for me for that game. I think I spoke too much about that one.
all I'll say about North Melbourne is they're going to get pumped half the time, and so they're only going to score 1,500 points, 1,600 points as a team. And so when Sheasel gets 100 of that, there's not many points going around. So as much as some of these guys looked okay, they're not all scoring well. So I would pick one North Melbourne player, and that's it. And
yeah. You're so right. You're so right, and exactly right. It's going to be the players that are in the back line. It's going to be players on ball that you can bank on. But they were reasonably close in this game as well to the Saints. Like they were pretty close for 3 quarters. I think late they even hit the lead. And Saints kicked back in that last little bit. So that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen every week. They're not going to be within 4 goals. It's sorry North. Sorry all 12 North supporters out there. Like it's not.
It was a bit of a weird game down at RSA Park there, because the wind was just absolutely heaving it to one side. I think we saw that goal from Coleman Jones from the literal like centre circle, just absolutely launched the thing. So it's not a great indicator of how footy's going to be played, despite how physical it ended up being. But such a loose game. Great for the halfbacks.
I can't believe the game we've talked about the longest distance in North Melbourne.
I know. And we've still got one more to go.
Last one.
What have we got?
Nice and quick with with 2 more irrelevant sides.
Yes.
One. Sorry.
Yeah. Fortunately, these teams are the most relevant. I'll start with a couple of West Coast players who I think at least worth talking about. Harley Reid, lock him in. People talking about him not being great the week before. 88 SuperCoach, 60% of CBAs this week, and he took 3 kick-in, so he's just everywhere you want SuperCoach players to score. Put him in, don't think about it. The other one is named Mr. No Elliott Yeo. 96 points, 75% of CBAs, had 9 tackles.
He's back, baby. He's back.
447k defender mid. I'm not going to touch him with having 5 for my team already, but he's one of those players where you can, as a defender, having that sort of guaranteed centre bounce midfield role, it's really easy to like. We'll move on to Adelaide. We won't spend too much time on him. Matt Crouch, maybe my favourite of that sort of 490k tier guy. 114 SuperCoach, had 57% of CBAs, and had 23 touches at 100% efficiency. Just looked fantastic. Laid CBAs were kind of weird in this game, though. I just kind of want to point out, because one man I've had in my team a lot of pre-season, but only a little bit skeptical of now, Rory Laird. He led Adelaide with 61% CBAs, had 72% time on ground, but only put up 89 SuperCoach points. He looked fine, but there is talk about him playing more midfield time, pushing Rankin up into the midfield, and he was arguably the best on ground behind Riley O'Brien, who was playing against a traffic cone. Isaac Rankin, 138 SuperCoach points, 29% CBAs, but he kicked 4 goals. Of all those cheaper forward options, he is probably one of the ones you seriously need to consider. He doesn't have an early buy on a team that's going to improve. I think Adelaide might be a top 4 selection this year. I put that in the Sanctum crystal ball prediction. So, and it's on record now. So I'm big on Adelaide this year.
I agree.
Jordan Dawson premium, only 90 SuperCoach, but just looked great. 4 free kicks against. Only played 66% of the game, so 2/3. But he just looks like a class footballer. The one of Adelaide players who stood out to me as someone who I am a massive fan of, just due to picking him up in a draft a couple of years ago. Sam Berry, 115 SuperCoach, 227k at 22 disposals, 7 tackles, 2 goals. Just looked all about the game. Pressure was enormous. 43% of CBAs. That's a watch come round one, see if he's actually there. You'd be a brave man to pick him, at least to start him, maybe move on to him if he plays well those first couple of games. But yeah, he looked immense. So he's someone to consider. Another guy we spoke about previously, a West Coast boy, Alex Witherden. Scratch him off your list if you were considering him. Took 4 kick-ins, but he's splitting kick-ins with a bunch of other defenders. 472k. You could do so much better at that price point. You'd look at one of Nick Martin. You'd look at one of Matt Crouch, who either is going to be a 105 plus scoring player in the mid or potentially a D6 backman. You're really looking at those guys to stand out for you. I think that's most of the relevant players for that game there. Anyone else, guys?
All I'd
No,
say
you've
is
done well
that
to pick out a few West Coast players, to be honest.
I'd say I'd say that Rory led 3 tackles. I mean, he averages about 10 tackles, so he probably just had no interest in putting too much effort in. So 90 points with only 3 tackles, he'll rack them up still. I wouldn't be too worried about Rory Laird.
Just an interesting one as well. You were saying about Riley O'Brien. He absolutely smashed that game. And Riley Thilthorpe down for a few weeks probably. He's probably going to be solo ruck for a little while. Might be one that I don't know. A couple of years ago, he was absolutely smashing it. Was actually relevant in terms of that ruck role. I don't think he's been really getting a bit of a look in from SuperCoach coaches out there, but he could be one to look at.
I'll just jump in now.
Right.
Yeah.
Wrap
So
them up.
I will just say we just, for those who watched listen to the whole thing, we've reeled off about 75 players. So good luck trying to narrow it down to 30 for starters. I think next week, once we've seen some round 0, jump on and listen or have a watch next week, because we'll try and certainly narrow the focus for you. So if you're umming and ahhing about a few, we can certainly narrow the focus for you before we head into round 1 and start things properly. Just out there, if you're watching or listening, if you want to chuck our team, the podcast will have a team. We'll talk about that next week as well. If you want to chuck our team into your league, just send us an email at the email that's on my little thing there, TISSCPOD, so the Inner Sanctum Supercoach Pod at gmail.com. And if you've got any questions you wanted answered in the podcast, shoot us an email as well, and we're happy to answer those throughout the season. Looking forward to round.
That also goes, if I can add one more thing, that also goes for any questions or any other things you want us to talk about. Follow us on Twitter at SC Sanctum, trying to push out some content on there. So good stuff happening there if you want to get us real quick.
That's it. It's all happening. The Supercoach world is at a buzz with the Sanctum, whatever we're called, Supercoach Sanctum. I think that'll do us for this week. We've reeled off plenty of players. Looking forward to 5 dominating in round 1, that's for sure. Thanks for everyone for sticking out this week, having a listen, having a watch. Share it with your friends. We'll see you all next week. Thanks, boys.